Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. My name is Belén Gallego, and I am part of the ATA Insights and the RankMath team that brings you today this online session on energy storage and the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. And we're going to explore today how the Inflation Reduction Act gives a proper and strong boost to this specific technology, which is energy storage. So welcome, everyone. First of all, before we get started, I'd just like to ask the people in the audience, whether you're in YouTube or whether you're in Zoom, to please use the chat to introduce yourself, your company, and tell us as well where you're joining from today, because we love to see, everyone that is there. I can see someone that is already, David, from the western slopes of the Rockies, and I'm sure there are many other people, so please introduce yourselves there. This is usually a very decentralized session. So for example, today I'm in Los Angeles, and I'm going to ask the speakers to also tell us where they are in today, so that you can see, that there are people usually from everywhere. So I am not going to be the person who talks to you about the IRA. I have 4 specialists with me today that are going to tell you about it, and I would like you to know them a little bit better now, if you don't already. So I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves. So Daniel, if I could start with you, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Certainly. Nice to meet you, everyone. Daniel Spitzer. I am the head of the renewable energy practice at Hodgson Russ. Hodgson Russ is a law firm. I'm in Buffalo, New York office, and our offices are from Toronto down to Florida along the East Coast. We've been doing environmental and energy for a long time. We've been doing renewable energy since long before it was called renewable energy, and have been working a great deal with the Ascendant energy storage business. So I'm really looking forward to this today.
Thank you very much, Daniel, and welcome. Next, I'd like to ask Sherif to please introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Sherif Abdelrazek. I head up Duke Energy's energy storage and microgrid engineering team, mostly focused on everything technical relating to the identification and development of energy storage and microgrid projects in Duke Energy's regulated footprint.
Thank you very much. So welcome very much, Sherif. Next, I'd like to ask John to please introduce yourself.
Hi, John O'Brien. With Private Energy Partners, which is a part of the Quinbrook Energy Partners Group here in New York City. Joined 6 months ago to help build out the storage capabilities across the entire Quinbrook portfolio, and to help out portfolio companies where they need in terms of storage projects. Also came from Siemens Financial Services, where I spent 14 years doing project finance, including, I guess, applicable to this group. We did 5 standalone battery storage deals in the market, mostly merchant, but also spanning across the country. So a good perspective in terms of both the financial and the commercial equity side.
Excellent. Thank you very much, and welcome, John. And last but most certainly not least, Randell, please, if you could introduce yourself.
Yes, hello, Randell Johnson, CEO and founder of Acelerex. We've spent the last 5 years or so finding valuations for energy storage, and we were often finding that the value just wasn't there yet. And now with the ITCs, it looks like a lot of storage is going to come into the monetizable and into the money.
Thank you very much, Randall. So yes, this is a bit what happened, isn't it? For the longest time, the industry had a list of, like a wish list with like this other thing in order for it to make it work. And somehow, somewhat, all of a sudden, many of those wishes, and I'm sure if we wanted to wish for more things, we could, but have come together, and now we need to figure out exactly what they mean, how are they applicable, how do we design, projects and execute them in a way that we can benefit from those, that I suppose, hand up that we're getting from the government to develop this industry. As we know, it's not like the value isn't there for the energy storage industry. It's clear the value that it gives to the grid, to the users. However, we're trapped in this kind of transition period where we're still relying so much on gas and other fossil fuels that it's hard to find the market for technologies that come to solve problems that at the moment, they're still kind of like, some of them are there, some of them they're still upcoming or will come in the next few years. So anyway, let me just give you a very quick explanation as to how we're going to work today. Okay, we're going to have 4 short presentations, and then we'll have some time for like some structured conversation and your questions. So your questions, please send those through the Q&A box at the bottom, because they're easier for us to manage, so that we can make sure that we're responding as many as possible. The chat you can use to chat with your colleagues, introduce yourself. It's really interesting to see there are people from all over the US here. So, we can kind of keep a conversation going for the questions through the Q&A box. And one thing that I wanted to tell you is that we're recording this and you will have access to the materials. So you don't have to worry about it, because we will definitely be sending those across to you. So without further ado, I'd just like to ask Daniel to prepare your presentation so that you can start. Okay. And for everyone else in the audience and in the speakers, just to, bear in mind that if you want to send the questions, to send them through. If you can put that in large screen.
Should be showing me from the beginning now. Yes.
Yes, it does. Go ahead, Daniel.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. It's just turned 1 where I am, so hopefully it's afternoon with you. It's great to see this presentation, and this is really fun to talk about. We have been working for so long to get storage ITC on the same level as other resources that, and for a long time, as one particular senator went back and forth, we didn't think we were going to get it. So it's really been interesting, particularly for those of us who get involved in the modeling of projects, try to figure out, what exactly is going on and how are we going to do this. The ITC really is a game changer. So I believe these will be made available to you, my PPT afterward, but a little bit of gossip and propaganda about Hodgson Russ. As I said, we've been at this a long time, and this energy storage is one of the areas where we do a lot of work. So the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, is really a great victory, as we talked about. Wood Mackenzie, which many of you probably know is a leading agency, has forecasted that there'll be a 30% increase in energy storage as a result of the ITC, that much in terms of deployment. And deployment's already been going through the roof, but particularly in light of the cost and supply constraints that we've been dealing with recently, it really is essential. So what I'm going to do here today is I'm going to focus briefly on the ITC provisions, while my colleagues are going to discuss some of the other aspects of the IRA, the requirements to qualify for the ITC, such as domestic content and prevailing wage, credit and tax equity implications, and an overview of the IRA itself as it applies. So let's go back a little bit just to the beginning so everybody knows where we're coming from. The IRS in the 2013 letter ruling held that commercial behind-the-meter batteries included in an original solar system would be considered part of that solar system's property for purposes of the ITC within Section 48. And they came up with a rule, though, that said it had to be at least 75% of the energy stored had to be derived from solar energy, the system. And if it was less than 100%, you got a haircut. In other words, you didn't get a whole 100% of the credit. It depended on the percentage. And once you hit 75, that cliff, it fell off. We got ITC on the board for energy storage, but only to the extent we were part of solar or wind. That ruling was later expanded a little bit so that it's made it clear that if it's part of the system, but it was installed a year later, it still could qualify. But we were only dealing with being chained, if you will, to other renewable sources. So what we get now is the old provisions are essentially gone. Under the new provisions, ESS is upgraded to its own eligibility for the ITC. To qualify, we're talking about systems of at least 5 kilowatt hours. And what the new law does, and it's kind of interesting, it kind of splits the ITC into an upgraded section of 48, Section 48, where we're now at the table as full partners, and a new technology neutral section, Section 48E, which goes into effect in 2025. And really, although it's not clean, the dividing line is these other requirements that our politicians in their wisdom have chosen to add on to the situation. When I look at some of these provisions, which Sherif and others are going to describe, I kind of think of them as lawyers' full employment provisions, because here we have a set of provisions. We don't yet have regs. and understanding how to comply with them is going to be interesting. So under the IRA, we now have a definition of energy storage, which includes thermal energy property, but not your swimming pool or combined heat and power systems. But basically, we're talking about property which receives, stores, and delivers energy for conversion to electricity. I think all of you probably know what constitutes batteries. And there's some interesting questions around this in terms of if you have other equipment that is mobile as opposed to stationary. How will it qualify if it would otherwise qualify for certain credits, especially with all the potential of any type of storage facility to go back to the grid. But for the most part, we're talking about the typical energy storage projects that most of you deal with all the time. So for the basis of the so if you, by the way, if you modify property, the modification, if it has a capacity of at least 5 kilowatts, will be treated also as qualified facility. So that's important to keep in mind if you've got a project that you're adding to, that the basis of the modified project property will be eligible even if it's standalone storage. So if you've built a system and it wasn't qualified, you upgrade that system, the upgrade's going to be eligible under the new rules, which certainly helps upgrades pencil a lot better. And as I mentioned, energy storage property now lies on its own. What it does is it creates a tiered credit structure, particularly as you look into two things. So the base ITC credit is 6% of the basis, the eligible basis of the equipment. And so that's what you get unless you are qualified for a higher amount. Now, under the revised Section 48, pretty much just about everything's qualified for the 30%, but not completely. This is where it starts to get complicated. We're going to talk about this in a moment related to the construction dates, but pretty much we're talking about a 30% credit that can there's other opportunities to go above that based on domestic content and property subject to a accredited energy community. For those of you around the country who are located in areas where fossil fuel facilities have gone out of business for whatever reason, and they may not be the facilities that you necessarily think of. So for example, I live in Buffalo, New York. Within a mile of where I live is a facility, a coal-fired plant that went out of business. New York has no coal-fired plants left too, and then there's another one just down the lakeside. Both of those are probably energy communities. As you're looking in, as New York, which is very aggressive in terms of energy storage incentives. Here we have communities, we have a number of these communities around the state where coal has been phased out, where natural gas is being phased out, that depending on how the regs come out, probably qualify as energy communities. We're expecting to see the same things in other communities where gas has replaced coal as the primary source. So one facility that I'm dealing with in West Virginia is basically replacing coal-fired facilities. Those communities that have the coal-fired facilities should qualify for that energy community incentive. So keep an eye on that. We don't have the regs yet, obviously. You get basically a 6% ITC unless if you don't meet the prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements, which I believe one of our other speakers is going to go into, unless for two things, and this is really important. If your projects are below 1 megawatt, you're going to get the 30%. This is what I talk about, a tiered credit structure up to 5 times the amount. And if you're deemed to meet these, you are deemed to meet these requirements for construction prior to 60 days after the guidance regarding these requirements is released. So you're going into operation today, guess what? You're getting 30% because there are no regs yet. And if you're familiar with how long it takes the Treasury and IRS to put out regs, it may or may not occur in our lifetime. Don't hold your breath. But for now, we're looking at, if you're talking about today, you're talking about 21, 22, you're in good shape. So this is the very important concept to understand. of this act beginning of construction deadline. I don't know if they purposely tried to make it A, B, C, D, as they often do with these type of things. But this is really important to understand to avoid being limited to the 6% base credits. So the A, B, C, D date is 60 days after the IRS releases its prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements guidelines, not when it's final. It doesn't say when the regs are finalized. It says it releases guidance. So that date, of course, is currently unknown. But if you've got some facilities that don't have all of these requirements in place, and you hear through the grapevine that these regulations are coming, that this guidance is coming, you may want to speed up that construction. It becomes quite a bit of an interesting game there. But a facility that has already been placed in service this year, or that is about to be placed into service, including facilities in 2021, they're going to get the full credit. So if you were placed in service prior to January 1, 2022, the historic PPT otherwise applies. Facilities on which construction begins are eligible, thus, as I said, unless you can also satisfy these requirements once you get after the act. It's very important to understand those requirements. Come December 31, 2024, we say goodbye to Section 48, and we have a new clean energy investment tax credit, Section 48E. In terms of this, what we're talking about here is really the same thing, except it's very clearly technologically neutral. So the whole goal is to say we don't care where you get the energy from, as long as you choose storage. It largely mirrors the current investment credits discussed above. Again, you have, but there's no exceptions. There's no grandfathering if you didn't meet those requirements that my colleagues are going to talk about. So the credit amount is phased out based on when the facility construction is applicable after the applicable year. So the way the law is set up, we're going to get this for 10 years to 2032, unless the greenhouse gas emissions from the production of electricity in the U.S. is reduced by 75% from 2022 in a prior year. I don't normally make predictions, but it would be great if that happens by 2032. Don't hold your breath, but for modeling purposes, you're probably good figuring in 2032. So the way it works is for the first year after the applicable year, you still get 100%, drops down to 75, then 50, and in the fourth year after you hit either 2032 or 75% reduction, it's at zero. So that's just the basics of it. We're now at the same table with wind and solar. We moved to a really simplified method, but the hard part is the qualifications for all the other requirements and all these other adders. So I'm at this point going to turn it over to my.
Thank you very much, Daniel. It appears that in the nick of time, because I don't know about you, but I think Daniel got cut off in there. So, yeah, hi. So next, I'd like to invite Sherif to present, and thank you very much, Daniel. It was really interesting. We lost you just at the very end when you were finishing, so. Okay, Sherif, I can see your screen, so go right ahead for it.
All right, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you fine, and the presentation is perfect.
Perfect, great. So thank you so much. I'll go ahead and get started here. All right, so this first slide is just focusing and just in general in this discussion, I'm going to focus on the domestic content clause, because that's really what as an engineer I'm focusing on, because it affects how we're going to source product, where we're going to put a lot of our energy in vetting different battery cells, inverter products, and just equipment we're going to use in our carbon plan for grid-tied battery projects. So very briefly, an overview of the domestic content ITC bonus. So from 2023 onwards, projects will be able to get a 10% bonus on top of the 30% if the equipment within the project and is deemed to be domestic content at a very, very high level. Steel and iron, there's two main requirements. Steel and the iron requirement requires 100% of steel or iron required for structural products to be sourced from the US. In my mind, that strikes me as racking, for solar projects, racking. It's still not clear for energy storage projects if that applies to ISO enclosures, for example, if that's the construction that's used for a battery project. But I guess there's a lot of clarity to be attained in the near future on that front. But on the other hand, the manufactured product requirement has a phased domestic content requirement. In other words, what you're eligible to get of that 10% additional credit dies out from 2024 all the way to 2025. So we're going from 100% to 90% in 2024 to 85% in 2025 and 0% after 2025 or 2026 and beyond. So I'll just move to this next slide here. So this is where I think there's a lot of questions going on between project owners and battery OEMs, mainly around how manufactured products will be considered domestically sourced or domestic content. So per the language provided in the IRA, so manufactured product, so ensure that not less than the adjusted percentage of the total cost of all components and subcomponents of a manufactured product, which, like solar panels and batteries used in a project, are mined, produced, or manufactured in the US. So if you look at the adjusted percentage, it varies by year. So, and again, the adjusted percentage is the percentage of product or components sourced or mined from the US versus not. So that percentage goes from 40% before January 1st, 2025, if the construction begins before then. During 2025, 45%, 50% in 2026, and 55% after 2026 or in 2027 and beyond. But something to consider, especially if you're familiar with the current construction of grid-tied battery projects. There's a lot of structures out there, a lot of models to how battery systems are constructed. For example, there's the OEM model where basically you're getting all of the battery model, the battery cells, the battery racks, the enclosure or the cabinet from one battery OEM. So think of, for instance, CATL's single rack cabinet as an example. Samsung has a similar one. So in that case, obviously 100% of your product in CATL's case is being sourced from China. So chances are you're not going to qualify for this bonus. But if you look at other models where integrators are like sourcing cells from, it may be cells, from really anywhere in the world, but the vast majority currently is being sourced from China, especially if we're talking about LFP, but even not, if we're talking about NMC, there's also a significant amount being sourced from South Korea. So what battery integrators do, or what a lot of them do, is they put these battery cells from these OEMs into battery modules, put battery modules into racks, and racks into the enclosures that could easily be done within the US. So in that model, at least you have a chance if the cost of different components plays in your favor. However, since it is based on cost percentage, the adjusted percentage is based on the percentage cost of these components, it's most likely, and I want to get thoughts from others on this panel, it's most likely that cells may need to be sourced from the US to get this bonus, at least probably more likely in the later years than in the earlier years. If you consider that really the cost of the cells themselves is on average 20 to 40% of the total cost of the project. So I think as an industry, we just have a lot to think about in terms of where our products are going to be sourced from. Talking with a number of integrators, there's questions around, all right, what about if some equipment are manufactured in Mexico or Canada? Can that be considered a domestic product? They're actually pursuing that. So, we can only kind of imagine if that happens that, that would probably help out a lot of integrators, but only time will tell. So that is it really for what I wanted to talk about. So I'll pass it back over to you, Belen.
Thank you very much, Sherif. We're going to continue with the presentations and then we'll do the questions at the end, but I think you've already received some. So maybe you want to take a look at the questions that have been, well, one question from Jamie that they've sent you about something specific in your presentation. Thank you very much for contextualizing this for us. Next, I'd like to ask John to please introduce, set up your screen. Oh, let me get Sherif's off. Here you go. So that you can prepare yours, John, and start. And just a reminder, just to send your questions if you like through the Q&A box at the bottom. Siko, we never got your question through the Q&A box. I don't know if you can resend it just to make sure we have it there. And John, go right ahead.
Right. Well, no slides or presentations. Just
okay. Sorry.
Me as a talking head here, but what I'm focusing in is kind of a little bit more of the practical commercial aspects of the IRA. Interestingly, we get a 30% ITC, which is great, makes us party like it's 2020 when you factor in the cost increases for the batteries. But eventually, the prices are going to come down on batteries, and this 30% additional decrease in overall project costs is going to be significant, and it's going to enable a lot of projects to pencil that ordinarily wouldn't or wouldn't today. In my view, would this necessarily be projects all across the country? No, because the IRA doesn't make up for the fact that some areas don't really reward batteries for doing what they do. But what it will do is enable that marginal project in ERCOT or California to hurdle someone who's in New England, Massachusetts, something like that, to hurdle their projects if it was a little less, a little less on the IRR side. This 30% will certainly help out there. When you're taking a look at the IRA, I think two things kind of stand out. One is obviously the tax credit itself, and the other one is the disaggregation from the need to tie it to a solar project. And what this will do is provide a little bit more flexibility in terms of the project location itself. Put it maybe in a little bit more beneficial location. So instead of necessarily tying it to your solar project, you can put it in a place that is beneficial to your project in terms of the constraint you're facing or the constraint that you're up against in the contract that you have. So, in a lot of these solar projects, you're with your CNI offtake, a lot of the projects face a lot of basis risk. So you may be in the southern part of Texas, but you're settling at Houston. That's an issue for you because, especially with the additional projects being added because of the IRA, that basis differential the lack of space on the actual grid itself, on the lines, will just amplify the cost difference between your node and the hub that you're selling into. And what that does for storage is allow you to have the opportunity to take advantage of that, either, as the solar developer, to put your storage in a better location to help out with that basis risk, or as a standalone developer, offering up, if you needed, some sort of contract to the storage project to help alleviate that basis risk. So there's a lot of opportunity there by not having to tie your storage project directly to a solar project. And then the other thing to think about with the ITC is obviously the credit. And do you take the credit or do you use it as a saleable transfer? I buy into the idea that, in the first kind of year, or maybe the first 3 quarters of 23, the ideal will probably be doing your standalone project with tax equity, because it's there and it has everyone has an idea of how to do it, and people have done it, and it will be simple. Whereas with the transferable credit, right, a market generally has to be made, and a lot of people will have to understand what happens to these transferable credits in order to get them confident into buying them. But once that market is made, once there's a broker or banker who's able to kind of make the match between the project and the actual and the person interested in the credits, I think, especially for storage, that will be the preferred route. Appreciating the fact that you're leaving the makers on the table, but it's a simpler structure in many ways. And the reality is, and I've debated this in my head, is there a tax equity market for storage, especially at the amount of tax equity generated by each project? And the question in my mind is answered with no. And I think the other complicating factor is as we've seen with solar, the tax equity providers really want to have contracted revenue at the project level, and that's going to, as of today, even though it's certainly being worked on, as of today, there's really no easy way to contract a lot of these projects. There are projects out there that do have it, but the majority probably will have to contemplate how you're doing something merchant or on a hedge. So the reality is giving up a hedge. Are you giving up too much of your revenue with a hedge? And the answer in many cases is yes. And again, that throws it all back to the fact that perhaps a transferability of the credit to someone else is the ideal route for storage. And I think from there, lenders will become comfortable with lending against either a purchase and sale agreement at close, or maybe even shift to the fact, once a bunch of these have happened, that these are indeed a saleable credit, that it is something that people want and that there's a market for, and that you can have all the way up till COD to sell them, and that the lenders could then lend to a certain degree, whether it's maybe 50% without a contract, and then stepping up to 95 or 100% once a contract is signed. That's certainly possible, mimicking a lot of the tax equity bridge loans that exist. And I think that in and of itself will become very powerful for the storage industry.
Thank you very much, John, for that really great explanation and description, of the financial aspects of these projects. And last but certainly not least, Randell, if you want to give us your presentation, please. And then we'll take it from there, guys. This is the time. Send your questions, we'll get it started. We do have some, to get us started, but by all means, send them through. Okay, so let's go. I can see your desktop. Okay, let's hope that it doesn't pixelate. Can you take your mute off, Randall?
Oh, yeah, all right. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, go right ahead.
All right. So real good background from the other speakers. So a lot of the context and the setting and some of the changes. For us, it was a big deal to see that storage and solar were no longer conjoined twins, and we took a saw and cut the two apart because it never made any sense that storage would be fundamentally tied to a renewable, because storage can do a lot for the grid and is needed for the grid outside of what the renewables do. So we're very pleased to see, and that was what we were all wanting for a long time, is to see that the storage could be standalone. That being said, you know, there's a lot of combinations of the storage in this IRA that can be very interesting, and it can hit the whole entire supply chain of electricity system, from residential behind the meter to CNI to grid scale, and ultimately into EVs and supporting the grid from an EV point of view. Just given the perspective of it, the size of this IRA is phenomenal. It's the biggest thing ever in the human history, an energy bill like this. If you look at some of the spend, 200 billion. This is the Inflation Reduction Act. In the previous, from the bipartisan infrastructure bill, you can kind of see what the infrastructure, what the Inflation Reduction Act offers, and the size of it, just the incredible size of it, and the kind of spend, 300 billion, 400 billion. I mean, these kind of numbers are bigger than most countries' GDPs, than many countries' gross domestic products, production, I mean. So then the other thing I wanted to point out is just on to the solar, 3 kilowatt hour, 5 kilowatt hour, kind of some of the things that David had already gone through in good detail, and some of the adders that Sherif had gone through, and some of the kind of different scenarios that can happen now for storage being combined with anything. You think of hybrid everything, because it won't make sense. There'll be a lot of standalone storage projects. We had spent at Acelerex, we had spent the last 5 years doing valuation in all the markets, even at utility integrated resource plan levels, and looking at storage. And a lot of times it was very difficult to get it to actually pencil. And now it does. Now, it is called the Inflation Reduction Act. We do wonder how much in the short term it's going to actually reduce inflation, and how much of these ITCs will get carried through. My apologies, I have a work from home here. Then the other kind of impacts that are interesting to see is is kind of where we see the percentage difference from current policy on different quantities that will come into play in terms of different policies, from incentives to fuel distribution. The thing, it hits so many different technologies that are incentivized. So that's why you really need to think about this as hybrid, everything, stick storage with everything, because there's value on a lot of the other assets as well, the solar, the wind, that kind of thing. And then here's some of the Inflation Reduction Act, where you could see greenhouse gas emissions go to, where the IRA is at, and some of the projections that are going there. And then the other one is contributions to net greenhouse gas emissions, some of the Build Back Better. So you can see kind of where how it's changing around based on the Inflation Reduction Act versus the Build Back Better, and some of the closes about, so the Inflation Reduction Act closes about 2/3 of the remaining emissions gap, is what it does ultimately. Then what I would like to do is show this one here. If you had a net zero pathway, this is kind of where you'd be at if you had the Senate Inflation Reduction Act, and then where some of the other policies were at. And with that, I would like to show just one more food for thought, and that is Sorry, I'm just trying to navigate around Zoom here. Here we go. Here, this guy here, this is a pretty cool website, and taking it down to the micro level. And this would be like a household of Rewiring America website for IRA tax credits. And if you scroll down this, if you're whatever, $100,000, 2 people in a home, joint filing, there's a zip code. It has a calculator that shows, $21,000 of incentives for, different systems at the home. Here's some of them: electric panel, electric stove, electric wiring, heat pump, weatherization. Then if you get into the tax credits, you got battery storage installation, geothermal heating installation, electric panel, new electric vehicle, used electric vehicle, rooftop solar installation. So one of the things that I've been struggling with is now what's going to be the trend, because before ITC for storage, it was like, was it going to be C&I that was going to really take off? Was it going to be the residential that's going to take off, or was it going to be grid scale? And it was kind of going back and forth. So now it's going to get really interesting because it does look like the residential's deep in the money, and there's a lot of potential there going there, and to kind of reinvent the grid all the way from just the start of the residential loads out. So that's the one thing that I'm going to be watching as time goes on, is to see which trends move the fastest in terms of where storage ends up and where it gets financed. And the good news is it seems to be, it could be across all of them now, from C&I, residential, grid scale, and EV. And with that, I'll turn it back over.
Thank you very much, Randall. What a great find, that website, Jay. It's like
Yeah.
useful for everyone. I bet you guys are all going to go and check, what you can do in your houses right away. Because, I mean, here in these webinars, we talk more about the utility scale side of things or the commercial scale side of things, but there is like a huge market out there. Also, in your own homes. So I do encourage you to take a look and see what you can take advantage of. So, okay, so the first thing that I wanted to, and there is a link actually that Randall is just saying. The first thing that I wanted to ask you guys, and I open it to everyone, is like, where do you think the biggest opportunities are now for energy storage, now that the IRA is there? And, I'm not going to get into whether, it reduces any inflation short-term, long-term, but I want to know, what did you see as the immediate opportunities? And particularly, I want to know whether you think this will open other geographical markets for storage, so that we see, other than Kaiser and ERCOT, also opening up, into larger volumes of storage. So who wants to get us started? Not all at once, please. Who'd like to start?
Yeah, I mean, I think as I mentioned when I was speaking, clearly it's going to help out immediately the markets that are there, the markets where people have already gone through the permitting and, the permitting and getting, the batteries and the site secured. So, clearly the early winners are going to be ERCOT and California. And it just simply is the fact that if you don't have a means to really monetize your battery, you just can't do it. So, what's going to have to go on from here is there going to be another market that has good price volatility, somebody like PJM, or is there going to be something opening up in ISO New England that may incentivize batteries by, really providing the economic benefits? It's something akin to, I know we're on storage, but, if you look at hydrogen, right, the hydrogen PTCs are going to get you a lot closer, but it still doesn't necessarily get you on parity. So, a lot of this gets you there and gets some marginal projects done. But if you don't have a means or a way to actually make this economic, even with the 30%, it's going to be hard to open up new markets.
And to pile onto that, I think there's going to be a big queue problem still. I mean, even though the IRA came along, it still hasn't solved the queue problem. And there's like gigawatts after gigawatts in the queue that need to get processed through the queue. And the IRA doesn't really speed that up, even though the projects now might be in the money. We still got a big queue problem in America.
And especially if it wasn't in the money until now, and you hadn't really prioritized that particular project, and you're at the back of the queue, that could be a 5-year process for you, if not more.
Wow, that's a long, long queue for sure. I mean, I would expect that now that all this federal money is there, a lot of other states would position themselves to take advantage of those great savings. Siko here is saying I saw New England as well, like huge opportunities at the distribution levels. You know, I'm sure like there are obviously pockets of value, but you know, I hope that the idea behind, you know, these federal level packages is that, you know, they start driving states into changing also their policies, hopefully. You know, that's the dream. Let's go with a few of the questions, because I've just seen that we are actually only have 13 minutes. So Sika sent a question here that says, please, can I ask, how would you go about inputting your ITC and value into your standalone storage financial model? Once we have worked out our eligible dollars value and what your tax equity investor wants in terms of cents to the dollar, how should we input ITC value into our cash flows? It's a very specific question, the first one.
I mean, I think you just handle it the exact same way as you would on your solar project, right? If you know what your ITC tax investor wants in terms of claims on cash flow, you know, and then what your debt provider will have, right? Once you have the claims on cash flow from your ITC investor, you know how much cash flow is going to go to you, the developer, and then you can just layer on your debt from there.
Thank you very much. He also asks, please, could you discuss variations, for example, if we do direct pay and credit transfers as well? Could you, John, confirm if we lose marks? I don't know what that says. Lose mark depreciation if you use tax equity. Did you see the last one?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's unknown, right, how much of a discount you'll have to give to someone who's trying to buy your tax credit. But when you transfer, right, you can't transfer the makers with you, but you can keep the makers when you have the tax equity. So that's the main difference. And then the question that has to be settled or worked out is the overall cost savings that you get from having a transferable tax credit. Is that make you indifferent to doing tax equity when you combine, you know, kind of the losses and cash flows plus the plus the additions of the makers? So yeah, I think it's TBD, but I think also the question more fundamentally is there a tax equity market for storage, especially when you can consider 100 or 150 megawatt project may only bring in $15 to $20 million of tax equity. You know, is there a tax equity provider that is interested in it? And is there a tax equity market for such a small amount when there's such a large demand coming for tax equity? And then you apply, as I think in the last presentation showed in one of the bullet points, right? If you have a 15% minimum income tax, right, you're already shrinking the applicable market for tax equity anyway, and you're just adding to it. So the question is there really tax equity available for the majority of storage projects? And that's also something that's probably up to debate.
Thank you very much, John. Question about long duration energy storage for you guys, whomever wants to take it. How much does the IRA help long duration? Is there anywhere where you see like those projects can be today competitive or interesting?
One of the things that we got to get through with long duration storage is that the technology needs to be here and be commercial and be bankable. Right now, we've got a lot of long duration storage startup companies. As we know in the battery world, a lot of battery companies start up and they go bankrupt. So for us, watching long duration is it really in the window right now, the 2025 window? We're still needing the guidance from the IRS past 2025. So it's interesting from an R&D point of view, but we still need to see the long duration storage technologies, many of them other than the traditional ones, become commercial, become scalable, become bankable, become warrantyable. So I think there's a bigger issue than just the ITC itself on those.
Yeah, the ITC is now technology neutral is the whole point of it. So it's not whether it's long duration, short duration. It really goes to exactly what Randall talked about. Is it a viable storage methodology that's bankable before? And if it is, then the ITC will be available.
Yeah, I'll just add my thought here. I think, there's a number, like Randall said, there's a number of startups and long duration battery OEMs in the US. I think from a domestic content standpoint, this kind of helps them to a big degree, since kind of, as we discussed, most of the cost of battery projects are in the cells. And most of battery cell manufacturers are not within the US. We have a lot of factories that are kind of either recently constructed or in the process of being constructed in the US. But still, I think if you look at the ratio of long duration battery OEMs versus lithium within the US, you're going to get more long duration. So I think that's definitely going to help them out. Not to say at all that these technologies are very well developed and we can, execute them 2023 or 2024. Some of them are more developed than others, but definitely further testing and piloting is needed for a lot of them.
Thank you very much. Here's just me hoping again the same thing, that once the incentives are there, the different states want to take advantage of that to build like really vital infrastructure that is going to carry them into the future. But of course, the signals are there. The question is whether the right policy framework is actually written around it. But I would hope so, because we cannot live with lithium alone. So but for that, needs to be put into place. So there's a question here that I think, Daniel, I'd like to to give you opportunity if you want to answer it. It says local governments, towns, school districts, etc. don't pay income tax, so the credits from the IRA are not available. Are there any benefits for towns and schools directly, or some other arrangement such as a lease to get the tax credit passed from the owner? It's just like, is there any way to make this sort of like arrangement work for like non-for-profit institutions, Daniel?
It depends on a number of things. First of all, the states all have different rules about what municipalities can do. If you have a municipal utility that files tax returns, that's the easiest, because they can invest and they can get, it's a refundable tax credit. So you can, through the direct pay provisions, you can actually get credit. But for a particular municipality, a school district, depending on the state rules, you may be able to invest in a facility. But here's the way we mostly use it in New York, the ITC, where we really can't, as a municipal or school entity, invest in projects. We use it in negotiations over pilots, leases, offtake agreements. We like offtake agreements because energy savings that way actually help us with our tax cap, which is a New York issue, but I know that in other states. So there's ways of using the additional profitability to the project in the negotiations with the folks that you then do. And, energy storage can save schools in particular a lot of money if you can enter into a system that's going to reduce your peak usage because I have one V2G bus transport system that's being cooked up where they're going to, in New York, we're eventually going to all electric buses. And already people are talking about what if we have those batteries not go back to the grid, but go to an energy storage facility? And so I think there's a lot of possibilities, but the main thing, Jamie, is to figure out how can you extract value from your partners who you can do business with in the energy storage business, or who are coming to you for permissions to do things.
Anyone wants to add anything there?
Say that. Sorry.
Anyone else wants to add anything there?
Oh.
I think
You know,
it'll be-
like,
Oh,
yeah, go
sorry.
on, Rand.
I think it'll be interesting. Curious Daniel's view on it is the post 2025, because the ITC kind of runs up to 20, and we're still looking for guidance from the IRS. So right now, it's not necessarily lobby your senator, but somehow, is there a way to influence the guidance of the IRS right now? Because that's the next frontier to figure out what's going to happen post 2025, right? And I'm just curious what Daniel thinks about that the IRS guidance and what's going to happen post 2025 potentially for ITCs for storage.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, one of the questions to answer is who's going to be the president in 2025? The normal rate of getting out regulations, the regulations may not be final. Also, you have who's going to control the Congress after 2022, because you have the ability within Congress to overturn regulations. So I think the regulations are likely to go pretty much strictly down the line and say, we said what we meant what we said, and not try to be policy oriented. Someone asked a question about energy communities. We don't really know what qualifies as an energy community yet. So I'm hopeful that those regulations will come out sooner rather than later. But as with most tax acts, the Congress has kicked a lot of the substance to the agency to come up with regulations, and I believe the deadline for the regulations is, as you meant, as apply, December 31st.
Of what year? Of what year? I was like,
Fairly
damn.
permissive, fairly significant efforts. I think I died again.
Which year was that again, Daniel? It cut out. Just what year was it that you said?
Geez.
Sorry, we can hear you now.
2024, December 31st, 2024. I'm gonna have to talk. I am also working from home with a less than favorable cable company. But
you know, I was hoping for 2022. 2024 is a bit of like, we gotta wait.
Yeah.
We
Well,
have two more questions. You go on, Danny.
yeah, I say I think there'll be a lot of push. The IRS now has a whole bunch more employees coming in, but the IRS has also used outside firms to help write tax regs, and hopefully they'll emphasize and they'll prioritize some of these so we can get moving on them.
Okay, so the two extra questions that we have here that I'd like to ask, and then is the first, I'm going to start with the last one, DL. Could American battery manufacturers that meet the domestic content requirements avail of the tax credits if they export their battery modules? Which credits and to what amounts would they get? So this is a good question. Can you export the batteries that you make using the credits, or are they going to stay in the US? This is also a question that we're asking in hydrogen. That you mentioned before the hydrogen, the IRA. Does it have to stay here, or what's going to happen with that? Does anyone know? No, I suppose you don't.
I don't believe that the manufacturing credits require the product to stay in America. The manufacturing credits are designed to increase jobs, as I understand it, in America. But if you're talking about those credits, which are really not part of this webinar, that are the energy manufacturing credits, which some of them are new, I don't believe that. I think they actually are pro-export. I'll defer to the others if they see otherwise. But I think those are different credits that we've been talking about here today.
They are definitely different credits. It's just, I suppose the question was in the line of whether this is staying here, therefore it's going to make our supply chain a little bit, more competitive, because that's what I had a question for you guys. Is like, how competitive do you think is going to become the supply chain in the next few months and years, say 2 to 3 years? We were discussing this just before we joined. Are prices going to go down? Are we going to see like a reduction where we see, the industry really becoming competitive? So I don't know, John and Sherif, you have, you were voicing opinions before. So you want to just say something about this, and we take the last question.
So, yeah, I think Sherif's, I think we're of the opinion there's going to be additional battery manufacturing here in the US. And the question is where does that additional capacity gets soaked up, whether it's all taken by EVs or, the same 5% of the pie will still go to stationary storage. And, I'm of the opinion that I think things will start to creep in and take over some of the 5% for stationary. But I'm also a little bit more concerned with the broader supply chain. So, not just the supply chain for a project, but the supply chain for the battery is where I'm a little bit more concerned, and what's really driving a lot of the price of the batteries increases. So, is there going to be enough new lithium mines, the other rare materials that go into a battery? Are they going to be found and mined and refined to the sufficient quantity to supply, all the new demand? And I think that's going to be a problem that's a little bit outside of kind of my realm as to the end use of the battery, but also tying that back to the question earlier on long duration storage. Most of these long duration storage project technologies, are not lithium based. They're a little bit different, and I think that may provide the jumpstart for some of those long duration projects. Whereas you may not need 6 to 8 hours, but it may also be the only battery you can get, and if you can get a project to maybe 50% of tax credit because of the domestic content and location and various items like that, then all of a sudden long duration storage becomes viable, even if you're not using it today for a long duration activity.
Thank you. Very good point. We have a question actually about thermal energy storage, and Partif here asks, what's the panel's perspective in either standalone modular thermal energy storage or hybrid thermal energy storage systems? So this is part of long duration, of course.
Thermal energy storage is part of the definition of energy storage technology. So unless it's one of the particular forms of thermal energy storage that's excluded, it should qualify for the ITC.
Yeah, I agree there. I think there's a number of OEMs that fall under thermal energy storage systems in the US, and I agree with Daniel. I haven't read anything that they wouldn't be, or their products wouldn't be considered for the ITC or count as domestic content, if that's the purpose of the question.
What was your views on it? Whether you see it growing, perhaps, whether you see that there is an option for this kind of technology. I mean, the good thing about this is a very well technology. It's bankable. We already have a lot of it. Yes, I mean, there is a lot of changes, from electricity to, but there are some companies, trying to push it, like Malta Inc., amongst others. Just like a little bit understanding that. Okay, thank you very much, John. Thank you very much, Sherif. Thank you very much, Randell, and thank you very much, Daniel. I think the opportunity is here. We have all the Lego blocks, and now the question is, how are we creatively putting this together, the different people across, the supply chain, and starting with the policymakers, the financial guys, the tax equity people, all the way down to the supply chain to make sure that we actually make this work. Yesterday, I was doing a very similar webinar in terms of hydrogen, and one of the points that someone made is we have all of the ingredients to put together this masterpiece, to really decarbonize, to push through new technologies, to create a lot of jobs, to change the industry completely, to innovate like never before, to come up, to do all this change, this positive change in the world. But there is also a lot of ways to perhaps focus on the wrong things, find the loopholes, and end up on the other side of the road without being able really to get that much done, like pushing technologies that are all that favorable. This can go one of both ways, and I think it applies here too. The Lego blocks are there, but it's about unleashing, what they have in them. And it takes a lot of creativity, a lot of intelligence, and a lot of, I think, innovative thought, to get us there. So the opportunities are there, the money is there to back it up. So I think, have to wait and see, what we're going to be seeing in terms of innovation at the design level, at the financial level in the next few weeks and months. And I have to say, I think it's down to the US to come up with a lot of these things that the rest of the world then will follow, because you guys do really well, coming up with all of these new innovations at all of these levels. So we're relying a little bit on you in terms of, I think, decarbonizing and then following in other parts of the world. So there is a big responsibility in your shoulders, I'm going to keep doing these events and watching and learning about this industry here in the US. Hopefully you guys, John, Sherif, Randell, Daniel, and also the people in the audience will be here in a few weeks, talking about it, and in a few months talking about the innovative ways in which we're taking this forward. So without further ado, thanking you again for being here today. I'd just like to say see you next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.